Okay, look serious. Life let men invent religion, philosophy, art, and science, souls that have a little something to occupy them till it returned in a form they could recognize anew. When your natural condition is your natural condition, it's tricky trying to perceive why additional effort should be undertaken. Men need schedules, same as horses need stopwatches. And the only timetables worthy of the few are those which are unnecessary and whose purpose is understood only by the participant. Cattle drives and parades need be paced by a common tempo, but the beat by which the mystic proceeds is heard by only him. The less a man understands about something, the more he'll want to talk about it. How can it be? How can it be that the thing keeping consciousness from freedom and expansion, the mind, is the same thing without which no ideas of freedom or expansion are possible? How can that be? And if you find this question disturbing or unanswerable, it just shows that you still don't understand that life does whatever it wants and leaves minds in its wake unsatisfactorily trying to explain what happened and why. How can it be? How can it be otherwise? When your natural condition is your natural condition, there always seems reason to be mad at yourself. A conversation for two. Faith in human institutions is like an individual cow, trusting fully the wisdom of the herd and blindly following it anywhere, even over the edge of a cliff. But wait, nay, and hold on there a minute, partner. If it is not actually the herd itself directing its movements, but rather life, then how can you err in compliance with collective action and thought? I must commend you on that response. Yet still ask of you, is a man to be content to be no more than a face in a crowd, a dot on a page, a brief, meaningless blip in the common neural network? Or can he perhaps internally cut himself somehow loose from the herd and pursue pastures unknown and unavailable to large numbers of trampling hooves? Questions. What could be more difficult than stripping consciousness from the mind? Trying to describe it. The process. What might be the benefit of trying to describe it? Distracts you from the fact that you're not doing it. And finally, what is the purpose of men asking one another questions? Helps keep them from stumbling across the answer. And now for today's algebra challenge. What is the only unbalanced yet valid equation? The one that on one side you could have the matter of questions in the plural, while its correct counterpart on the other is singular, the answer. Daddy, why do they hand out schedules here in the train station? So that men will still have something to do while they miss theirs. If you talk, you're in show business. The only question after that is whether or not you understand this. But I say, injects a viewer, is there not also the matter of whether or not you have any talent? Afraid not, oh dear. In fact, that's the very type of question men come up with to try and shield themselves from having to face what I initially noted. When your natural condition is your natural condition, it's hard to figure out how to get started. The learning curve. There was once a people who had a legend that said that man was created knowing all the answers, and that things have run backwards from what you would expect, and that what happened is that as time has passed, he has forgotten more and more of what he once knew. And I implore you, my friends, where are such people now that we need them most? A man once went in search of a school of enlightenment, but when he found one, they made him do physical labor more than they gave him any instructions. And for a while he assumed this had some metaphorical significance, then finally asked about it and was told that it was easier to tell someone to go dig ditches and cut hay than it was to tell them how to awaken. I kind of suspected that that would be the hot news item of the night. Two can play that. I'll lay it out and threaten like I'm going to say something about it. It's a good thing threats are cheap or I'd be broke. Whereas some people have large pots in which they cook up complex stews and gumbos, one man just had his mind. A viewer writes, if the mind is so useless, then how can it be used? Daddy, why are all mystical schools always on the other side of the world? So that men will have some place they can plan to go while they're not going. An agent told one of his acts, kid, always save your best material for the close of the show. And the performer pondered how the matter of death might fit into this. And as always, there's probably going to be some hotshot viewer in our audience who will wonder if this story wasn't in fact not about showbiz and physical demise, but about how man might approach the use of his mind under the conditions in which he first finds himself on the neural stage. The effort to become more conscious compared with other activities. As long as you're trying to play the violin, you're not. But look here, complains the viewer, that makes no sense at all. Well, my point exactly. One seeker of the secret says that his struggle thus far has turned out to be like a song with two verses. The first one was entitled, Grab a Holt, and the second, Now Let Go. Well, back up a minute, whines that same viewer. This one hardly makes any more sense than the first one did. Well, there you are. My point made even clearer. Nobody remembers Corn Bloomer, old Frank Dell. One man's theory is that words themselves are of little importance, that delivery is all that counts. And he goes on to say that if he be correct, just consider what this will do to the current relationship between men's minds and their tongues. Well, he says that it should, what it should do to their relationship, but that he's been around enough so as not to hold his breath on this. If you take any particular ordinary idea as being more serious than any other, then you'll take them all to be too serious. Finally, in a desperate fit of something or the other, one guy concluded that no one but a mystic or a fool would ever take anything in the routine world as serious, even momentarily. He said later that him having the kinds of interest he does, that he's not at all certain that he's pleased he thought of this. And see, if you'll pardon me saying so, that just proves what I originally said about taking any item as being more serious than any other. See? The varieties of news. Okay, here's the bad news. No real mystical school ever exists anywhere outside your own head. And from that, I'm sure you can figure out what's the good. Mommy, is this why so much of a mystic's wardrobe looks so much alike? Yes, sweets. From the neck up. A man asks himself, is it weird the vast number of things a mind can think about? Then realize that it is not, since it does not. A baby mind said to its elder, I want to be weird. And received the reply, shush now, or you might grow up to be actually grown. Judgment. Out of the mouths of babes and non-babes combined might, just might, finally comes something of consequence. Simple men will speak of physical change with vigor and conviction for two reasons. One is that it is possible, and secondly, that it is meaningless. Relative to the overall question. When your natural condition is your natural condition, it's hard to ever get yourself going. a certain man who, for years, had carefully pored over and through all manner of books supposedly about the Great Awakening, the Supreme Enlightenment, and the final liberation of the mind, became gradually convinced that life is normally perceived as but an illusion, and that the extended state of awareness would above all reveal this fact. But then as he pondered the matter further, it began to bother him in a particular way. He would picture the idea of all the films he had enjoyed seeing, and ask himself if he'd really want to go behind the scenes of moving making and see how all the tricks and illusions were done. He would periodically ponder this question and be slightly perturbed. But since he never achieved that special condition, his perturbance was more imagined than real, and certainly not fatal. Finding: if you're never going to be well, your present state of illness is irrelevant. Or, if you're just going to stay normal, it doesn't matter whether you're normal or not. The doctor may be in. Telling your mind to shut up is like cursing an echo. Don't tell it anything. Just slip away while it's yammering. One monastery devoted to liberation went by the name of "It's Easier Said Than Done," them being extremely firm believers in truth in advertising. Those who understand the nature of the human mind understand that the concept of truth therein is specious and irrelevant, and that what takes place in words is simply echoes of echoes, and what the more perceptive do is simply slip away amidst the yammering. Yes, it is easier said than done, but that's still no excuse. Unless, of course, you're still talking about it. When your natural condition is your natural condition, guilt is forever close at hand. The story of the struggle. The people stormed the gates. The king held them back. The people stormed the gates. The king fought them back. The king threatened the people. They ignored the threat. The king threatened the people, and they became alarmed. Everyone got edgy, the king and people too. Things became unsettled in town and court alike. And then it rained and all of them got wet. Good boy. Daddy, why are there so many books about the awakening? So that men will have something to think about to help keep them from doing it. One man had separate compartments in his head. But in his closet he also had individual slots for his shoes. Several of one man's major, or at least larger, organs wondered what this had to do with them. The reason for the awe-inspiring grandeur, size, and magnificence of the structures containing men's honorable institutions is that nothingness needs a proper home. Anyone who thinks that this in any way actually refers to a man's head does so on their own and at their own risk. Risk? Risk? Chortled and damn near choked De Vinci's brother-in-law. What risk runs a deaf man putting his ear next to a stack of Marshalls? If it's not going to go, I don't think that equestrian tricks is actually going to add that much. But there is always the possibility. Some people sort of react just out of sympathy for an animal of an animal act. They think they're cute. Which, according to one religion that you hear very little about anymore, is their story is that paradise, you don't have angels or anybody there to welcome you. You have kittens and dogs. Maybe a parakeet. Daddy, why is there so much uncertainty as to how to achieve enlightenment? So that spurious certainty will not fatally impede the few. Daddy? Yes, my boy. Is that the same reason I ask so many questions? What a kid, what a kid. When your natural condition is your natural condition, all the talk in the world won't help. A sign on the building by the base of the mountain said, you can teach people welding, dentistry, even physics, but what we teach here can't be taught. When your natural condition is your natural condition, you'll stay just as you are, naturally. Talk, a poem in 3 stanzas. Oh, you can talk about this, and you can talk about that. You can talk about this, and you can talk about that. Oh, you can talk about this, and you can talk about that. You can talk about this, and you can talk about that. Oh, you can talk about this, and you can talk about that. You can talk about this, and you can talk about that. The end. Praise be to Allah. While in an emergency, pit and rubber bands may keep afloat a damaged boat. But only a mystic himself can hold himself together. A man asked his brother, why just before it storms does it oftentimes look as though it's about to storm? How to know when you're doing it? You know that you're doing it when you can quit talking about it. That was actually the joke for the day. The sound of thunder can drown out many things, but the flash of lightning is not one of them. Daddy, is this why so many mystics pray for rain? Yes, but not just rain. Make that gully cutting, dam threatening, fish drowning, Noah frightening, fool strangler. Then you about got it. Maybe some of you didn't major in meteorology and not familiar with the term. Daddy, is that why so many mystics pray for rain? And Daddy responds, yes, but not just rain. Make that gully cutting, dam threatening, fish drowning, Noah frightening, fool strangler. Soon after men began to ponder and attempt to explain the nature of their existence, they invented short stories when they found the writing of full novels too laborious. But soon conceived of proverbs, once producing short stories proved too trying. And after that, hidden somewhere in the murks of man's long-forgotten, never-happened past, a mystic showed up and replaced all literature of both short, medium, and long form with a single word. And thus was born the single-word theory. Over the passage of time, it has... There's more. Over the passage of time, it has become widely disputed and often refuted. But, as that well-known amateur video clearly reveals, the single-word theory remains the only reasonable possible explanation for what happened. It just came over the wire. I didn't have time to write it down. It was a new story. news item, but it was one of those things presented in the context of a kind of a legend. So I'll leave it to you as to its possible apocryphal nature. Well, there's another news item. All news items, if they're put in words, are apocryphal. Thank you. Now we can safely press on. Or there's even another one. No one has ever presented you a serious news item without lying. That was too charitable. No one has ever presented to you, or anyone, of course, no one has ever presented a serious news item were they not an imbecile. Now, considering what I'm about to do, am I sure that I should have prefaced all that with those kind of stories? One good thing about having limited insight is that it's harder to be insulted even by yourself. Thank you. In other words, you could probably assume that you're either getting somewhere or nowhere if you can reach the point that you can insult and talk about how dumb and stupid people are and then press on in the same vein and not take it personally. That would definitely either fit gigantic personal leaps forward, or it shows that you are terminally. But wait a minute, there's a third possibility. I may, after all, be okay and all right and ordinary. But at any rate, there was a story I believe came in over the wire, as I was saying. I didn't have time to write down. It was a reputed legend of some group of people, or about a guy. It said that there was somebody that used to talk about this kind of stuff, same as I've been trying to do. And that the person originally, after he started doing it, did it in such a way that those that showed up and were interested laughed at it a lot. You know, it seemed like a lot of it, even if it apparently had some deeper possible significance, that it made people laugh. And at any rate, and then he tried to stop. No, wait a minute, I left that part of it. Well, I just ripped it off when I came out. Before he tried to stop, he considered, why are people laughing? Am I doing it on purpose? Now remember, this is somebody, I'm talking about a legend, something that reputed. Considered, why does this make people laugh? Is there any particular reason that I go along with it? And then finally ask himself, could I present in such a way that no one would laugh? I guess that's where I tore it off. Well, I'll try next time to find the pieces were back there if somebody will look before it gets thrown out. I guess I ripped it off too soon. See, some things aren't funny. Life let men invent religion, philosophy, art, and science so that they have a little something to occupy them till it returned in a form they could recognize anew. If you're interested, that was almost presented as instead of a 3-line little item, as a full-page story of some sort. But consider, after you have said everything in the world that can be said, which people did before they began to invent religion, etc. They had already thought everything possible. To give you a hint before we get there, even though this was page 1 of tonight, and page 29, the last item had to do with a single word theory, might I suggest to you, it just struck me just now, that there may be a direct correlation, if not even a damn connection, between page 1, the one I just read, and the one about the single word theory. It says that life let men invent religion, philosophy, art, and science so that they have a little something to occupy them until it returned in a form that they could recognize anew. The longer version, had I presented that as a full-fledged legend of sorts, I submit that I could have added at the beginning of the story that which you wouldn't normally suspect just from hearing this. If you recall now, it says, after that life let man invent, etc. So you would think, if you considered that as being some sort of actual reflection of what's taking place within the human nervous system and on this planet, that it happened sometime, a few weeks at least, if not millions of years after humans showed up. A long time. Because there's no record, there's no ordinary record, no assumed record of men having invented, conjured up the idea of art and science in prehistoric days, even if we would know it. But there's no remnants of it. That all that seems to be later day. But what if I'd present in such a way that it was almost immediately after man had the brain fired up? And what if I further suggested, or the legend suggested, that within that short period of time, let's just say moments, that men thought already everything about life that could be thought? At least any of you think my other creation story was an allegory of some sort about you coming down the line in life, and each individual has a quite brief, momentary, visual, eyeball to eyeball, tete-a-tete, do-si-do, not do-si-do, anti-do-si-do, face-to-face right here, that everybody has that chance, that it happens. Now, if that were not allegory, if it actually happened, then it would make a little more sense, the fact that men have thought about life, everything that could already have been thought. Like that. I guess literally that sounds impossible, because you think, well, look at the way in which the depository, the thing, the cash, that does always get a laugh. And many people shift in their seat. We don't want to make jokes about the far-reaching ends to which men will go with their ends. You would think, and from all ordinary views, the storehouse of human knowledge, which would include everything that I point out here, philosophy, religion, art, science, continues to grow at an ever-increasing pace. That we are constantly discovering new laws, we're conceiving of and manufacturing new technology, and etc. And so you would say, well, that possibly could not possibly be true. It's even stretching the idea of an allegory. But what if it was literally true? That you had that one opportunity, and that everyone has already thought about life, every thought that is possible. See, the subdivisions of reality is now the mind could argue the fact that, well, they didn't think of everything because we didn't even have the term mathematics, much less trigonometry. So we've got historical evidence that this only came about within the last 400 years, or that there was not even a word for science until such and such date. That people could not have thought everything possible just instantly, momentarily. But notice the legend would have said everything about life, because all the rest of this is subdivisions. All the rest of this is the mind trying to manipulate the mind in a linear, chopped-up fashion, making some apparent, quote, sense out of life, and turned it into all such things as art, religion, philosophy, and etc. And it says that life let men do this. They let them invent all such things, which is reality itself. But they let men invent philosophy, religion, art, and science so as to give them a little something to occupy them until it returns in a form that they can recognize anew. If we're talking about life and that everything else is simply a kind of camouflage, a kind of almost self-induced hypnotizing yourself, or you've got these hand puppets out there on your own hand, and you don't know it's your own hand. You keep saying, suddenly Kermit the Frog or Miss Piggy or somebody comes up finally with an extension of the string theory as to the nature of a unified field of reality in the cosmos, and it's your hand doing it. And I say that collectively for humanity. And you think we're making great strides. Well, yeah, as long as you don't know better. We're continuing to add to the great, astounding storehouse of human information, getting ever closer to a true, final, comprehensive explanation of what the hell's going on here. Yes, there's no doubt that if you look at it, you remember how they used to show the Muppet Show, just for instance. They got the stage here to where you can do all the stuff back here. And they would actually have humans maybe come out in front. But the point is, you've got to ignore where the little stage is, or where they got the hills, and they got pigs and little things back there, and they even have their feet to where they come off the edge and sit there. But assuming that you've got a little, even if you've never been on the Universal tour, you figure that that's actually somebody's hand, and they put that there to hide the hand. All right, the idea that at the ordinary level we're making great strides towards some understanding. Now, I'm not talking about in the sense that humanity continues to grow in progress. We know that. But on the basis that, strictly speaking, intellectually, that we are continuing to add important pieces, fill in missing parts, fill in blanks, wherein there's still questions of such importance that it stands in the way of any possibility of us understanding the nature of reality in the universe and of life. That is only true if you ignore the fact that it is humanity standing there. Of course, it's life with its hand is always up everyone's knickers. But there it is, it's humanity. It's what reality is. And you have to ignore the fact that your own hand speaks. And I said Kermit the Frog. It could be Kermit the Frog with a damn degree or several advanced degrees in physics or cosmology from Oxford. They could be an important person, a scientist, not some damn hand puppet. And he says, all right, we have taken the idea of strings, or what the latest one was. We have now taken the idea of a string theory insofar as being a possible background to a unified explanation of reality. And even though it has fallen into disrepute over the last 5 years, if I may now present it in conjunction with a more oblique view and take on the idea of chaos, and I can show how these two, and it may for a while sound as though this is a new important theory. If not actual proof, this is good new thinking. We're getting closer to being able to explain, hardly anybody says life anymore, to explain reality, to explain the nature of the universe, which is all the same thing. And all that sounds good. Remember, we're talking about strictly the intellectual, not the general overall progress and health and well-being and continued evolution of humanity. But insofar as intellectually, we're going to keep adding. We're adding. People say, I can remember right here in St. Paul, I can remember when our city library would fit in the back of a pickup truck. And now look at it. Just to keep up to date, we've had to ditch, it took us years to save up for a microfilm library and machinery so we could condense the ever-increasing number of books we had to keep here. And that's to the point we were having to go down to the point of hard disk and all that kind of stuff, that information, it is flowing and increasing at such a rate. It's not only astounding and hard to keep up with logistically, but then the other part is, we assume we're getting closer, if you're ordinary, we're getting closer and closer to putting it all together, and that there will finally be a theory to explain everything. Seems fine, as long as you ignore the fact that it's a puppet on the end of your hand going, here is the latest theory. And it doesn't sound like a joke this time. It's not a frog telling some kind of funny jokes. It's a scientist. It's a philosopher. It's a theologian. Anybody would be taken halfway seriously. It's an artist saying, well, here's what I'm attempting to display by my work. Here's what this new drama, this is what I am. It's all right as long as you look at it this way. It is mere distraction. The last part, if anybody would like me to, life let men invent religion, philosophy, art, and science so as they'd have a little something to occupy them. And we're talking about up here because they got plenty to occupy them as far as staying alive down here, but in our day and time it's almost for you dancers, a cakewalk. And for those of you that were a little more frisky, a turkey trot. It is now not much of a challenge. It does not occupy much of anyone's mind in our time and place insofar as staying alive. So that's why I specifically point out that life, let them do this so they'd have a little something to occupy them. You might also note again, I'm sure it must be clear, it's for the matter of whether you remember it, even in areas right now, other time zones, places that are not as dependent on the mind, places that are not as, generally speaking, technically evolved as we are. The less involved they are, the more that they're out having to daily scratch for a living, actually have to get out and hunt for food, and they do not even have any assurance whatsoever individually or collectively, a whole group of people, a whole tribe, they do not know. They have serious doubt each morning whether they will survive, whether they'll be able to feed their family. Under such conditions, relatively speaking, it's quite obvious when you think about it, they have a very limited art scene. Almost none of those places have an ongoing symphony. Science, is almost no universities. Philosophy, about the only good a philosopher would do in a condition like that is they might look at him and think, I wonder how he would taste parboiled. About the only person that ever survives under conditions like that is a priest, a shaman. They're the only ones that can barely get by, which somewhere philosophers years ago learned under those kind of conditions when he kept trying to describe what he considered to be reality or give his explanations. And the tribe began to look around, and everybody's starving to death. And out there, everybody's trying to pitch in there a little bit. Everybody's out trying to scratch and plant one more seed or a piece of corn. And this philosopher is the only guy that does nothing. And they begin to look at him, and you can see them begin to lick their chops. And that's when philosophers, if you want some real history, that's when they switched it over to, wait a minute, I'm not trying to explain, it's not me trying to explain to you the nature of life and why you should give me part of your food and I don't have to work. Once he realized, I don't know how many generations of philosophers it took, but once 2 or 3 philosophers lost their grandparents in a pot with some pine straw, they shifted, and they went from being philosophers, that is me giving you my interpretation of life, it went to, hold on here, folks. This is not my interpretation. I'm here representing God. That has, for years and years, has had a certain amount of success insofar as stalling off cannibalism. That they look at the person in the village that's of absolute least value under survival conditions. Who could be of less value than a thinker? Nobody. Nobody. I mean, they're going to be eating accountants and attorneys. It's the very least person, and so he had to switch over. There is something that you could apply inside of your own nervous system as always. But back to the fact, as I put it to you, that life let men invent religion, philosophy, art, and science so that have a little something to occupy them, but it's here. Because you don't need anything else to occupy you. Ordinary, simple people do, of course. And about the only way they get by, about the only way they want to be occupied is, well, let's open a beer and turn on the game. And that's about it. But at a wider range that we're trying to point out, speaking in the intellectual realm, is they let them invent such as life, let them invent such as that, so as to give them a little something to occupy them until it returned. See, I wanted to stop maybe and take a break and say, are there any questions anybody like to write? And I was hoping somebody will do it for you, would say, what does it mean to say life let men invent in religion, philosophy, art, and science so they'd have a little something to occupy them until it returned? I thought, sure, somebody go, what do you mean until it returned? That begins to sound like some kind of warmed over Messiah story, like until he returns. Except we're not talking about a he. We're not talking about somebody. We're not talking about somebody in life or some force in life. I said until life returns. Before we even finish the end of that last sentence, somebody should have thought, what do you mean until it returns? Where the hell is life going to go? God, you people are full of questions. Well, we could say technically, of course, there's nowhere life can go. But do not lay that recliner back and reach for the remote yet. O ye of satisfied and complacent corpulence and cellulite, rise up, throw off those shackles of love handles. Is that what Mark said? No. Jenny Craig Marks. That life let men invent such as this to give them a little something to occupy them until it returned, which cannot be true. I mean, where's life going? But here it is. I'm telling you one more time, even suggesting that it may not be allegory, that at one time everyone saw life. There was even another story tonight that I didn't pull out of a legend of one group of people that said, contrary to what you would expect, that men, when they were created, knew all the answers. And that contrary, absolutely contrary to what any reasonable mind would expect, it is the flow of time, the flow of events. It is absolutely contradictory to any logical expectation. According to their legend, they were born knowing the answers to everything they ever wanted to know. But as time progressed, as time passed, they gradually forgot more and more of it. Life let them invent all such as that to give them a little something to occupy them until it returned. Since we've already established that can't be true, what is it? Until it returned in a form that men could recognize and knew. Could I suggest that that could be tied to my creation story? That life didn't go anywhere, but men thought it did. Well, I suggest that's exactly what happens. How else can your mind find fault with, as you call it, life? How else can men be fearful of life? How else is it possible to be critical? How can you look around? Any reasonable, intelligent person, which they can, of course. This kind of rhetorical question is both smart-ass and deadly serious. How can reasonable people look around and go, well, things are absolutely falling apart? Rhetorically put, they can certainly do it. It's one sign of intelligence. That they would find it to be a sign of lack of intelligence on your part should they point out an example of horror, mistreatment of one man over another, all forms of destruction and death. They could say, well, there's an example. But looked at on the other hand of going from a limited view of a kind of sarcastic critique of life, which is actually just your perception of reality, you do not see life. How can you think that things are going bad? The only reason that you can believe that things are falling apart is that man, after that one glimpse, as far as you're concerned, nobody ever thought about it this way. They believed that life went away. They believed that life deserted them. Which I could also point out is at the heart of the very common mysticism under the guise of religion and other things about the Messiah, since I brought that up, that gods were here on the planet at one time, or the God, but at least some gods, and spokesmen for gods, people that came down and tried to help us, angels, demigods, or God himself. I guess most of the stories somewhere cover that. And then for some reason, God went away. They said, no, at any rate, went away. I won't make it any funnier. Every religion has a version of that. Christianity kind of played around with it, for those of you that are trying to weasel your way out. They started off with Jesus, the Messiah, and the Jews did too. It's the same thing. Now they don't, there is no distinction. At any rate, there is the feeling that the gods created man and then went away. Then there are all sorts of stories to explain it, but the point is, God went away. And then the simple, the ordinary-minded people, under all guises of either religion or some philosophical attempt to look at reincarnation, it is still the idea, no matter how they call it, that, why don't you come back, God? Tennessee Williams just couldn't spell God. Yeah. But everybody's down, hollering out, come back, God, waiting for God. When will God come back? They do not. Now I know that people, quite ordinary, sane people, take the idea of a Messiah and somebody coming back to save humanity. Probably the majority of the world would still profess their belief in that. So it's not just me making fun of that. But the point is, I'm trying to get you to see, if you change the word God, it's life itself. That is the only way that you can find fault with life once you begin to see it. It is the only way, is that men do believe that life went away. Just nobody in their right mind would ever call it life. Because they say, well, life can't go away, and I don't know what the hell you mean by life. Now, you talking about nature, you talking about God? Read my lips. You mean George Bush went away? No. Life, apparently, that is the only explanation, that is the only, God forbid I should say this, reasonable logical explanation for men believing that life is falling apart, or reality is falling apart. I know they want to call it life. Things are falling apart. Society, morality, whatever. It's just that things are falling apart, which is always the fear of death, if nothing else. And so the idea is the only thing that can save us is God returns. And since he doesn't show any real signs amongst those walking around sane with religious professions, since he doesn't show back up, then you're left with, well, he'll show up after I die. He's just waiting for me. We don't know where anymore. It used to be in the heavens before NASA. That's screwed up many religions' idea. Not all religions. There's, by the way, if you're interested, there's still guys out in tents in Oklahoma, parts of Texas and Louisiana that will still get there and point that God's going to come back, and people look up and be real nervous. See, they hadn't heard of NASA and all that. And even if they had, they'd figure it's probably some delusionary trick of Satan. It is the belief that life has abandoned man. And since that is too wide a concept that men do not even normally think about life being alive, and so it's certainly beyond their ordinary mental purview to consider that life had abandoned them, because, as I said, literally speaking, you could say, well, life can't go away. If by life you mean everything, which I do, just anything you say, it's inside of life. Anything else is a subdivision. And I'm talking about a serious, severe subdivision. No matter what it is, including God, including every God that was ever made, they're all just subdivisions. They all fit in. The universe, it all fits into life. So then somebody even takes that and say, well, life cannot literally abandon us. Life has got nowhere to go. Life can't go outside life. Right. I did it for you. But then look at what all the subdivision, the sub-beliefs, sub-delusions, that God has abandoned us, that goodness has abandoned us. And then it gets into a bit more of a secular, I guess, attitude of people thinking, well, even reason, good taste, morality is abandoning us. But it always seems to be a localized problem with people. That used to, it was decent and safe to live here in Athens, Greece. And now since the tourists started, after World War II, since we cannot establish a stable government, I don't know what, since the Orthodox Church has lost its standing, things are crumbling around us. It's the belief that things are falling apart, but all societies, all civilized groups of people, just subdivisions of the civilized nature of man on this planet, they all have built in a story, whether it comes out religiously, culturally, it's in the human genes, the knowledge that they're not going to die. The mind does not know how to describe it because it cannot take that big gulp of that life's alive. No, once you understand that, there is no other question. There's nothing else to ask. Literally, there's nothing else to ask theoretically about life or death. There's obviously got to be anything else to ask about life if you understand life's alive. There's certainly no question of death. Or where am I going? How am I going to get out of town? How will I get back? It just makes you appear to be a dumbass to yourself. There's nothing else to say. But in every society, there is a built-in kind of protection, the easy one being described religiously. That some way man has been cut adrift or cut loose from the direct contact with creation and goodness, or he's been sort of cut loose because of something that happened, who knows what, and that God, Allah, the good forces, they wandered away. They left him there. And then they got all sorts of stories. It's according to how desperate you are for something to occupy your mind. The stories can just be simple, that man offended God, and God said, well, take that. I'm going to leave. Just don't wait up on me. You can make it that simple, which is sort of the Jewish Christian version, or the Hindus. Their literature, I guess they were harder to, or more easily bored literarily, because they didn't settle at 2,000 or 3,000 pages. It went on and on and on, and they had all kinds of stories. The humans offended the gods, all kinds of different versions to suit the climate, suit the time of year. But in some way the humans offended the gods, and then there are all sorts of variations of it. That the gods pouted and left, and then the variations the gods pouted and said, we'll be back. And then the ones that the gods pouted and said, you'll be sorry. And then the ones that God just disappeared. It just goes on and on and on. But this story is, what I'm telling you, is built into the genetic network of humanity, is that life is alive. Life cannot desert us, and yet something seems wrong. And since the mind cannot even comprehend life is alive to start with, it then has to chop it up into a piece that can handle reality and come up with the concept of a God, normally the easy one. That in some way God has distanced himself from us. All powers of hope, progress, goodness, in some way has now cut us adrift and is not in direct contact. Back to mine. Life let men invent religion, philosophy, art, and science. And you understand why I say let man invent religion? That means let them invent all the stories in religion, such as the ones I'm just doing. The ones that name life God and said it went away. It let them do that. Life let man invent stories about itself, change its name, make it into a lesser entity, and tell lies about it. Like it abandoned us, it got mad at us for no good reason, or whatever. Life let men do that. Life let men invent religion, philosophy, art, and science, so's they'd have a little something to occupy them. I'm glad somebody likes it. I kind of like it. Life let men invent all of this. We're talking about the history of humanity. Not the survival history, not real warfare and fights and bars and on the plains of Asia. But this, the important stuff, the high-ranking stuff, art, science, religion, philosophy. Life let man invent this, so they have a little something to occupy him. What does that do to the world of civilization? Nothing. It's just what it always was. You just never saw it. Let him invent all this stuff, so let's have a little something to occupy him until it returned in a form he could recognize in you. Am I going to have to fully explain my own parable? Probably. Even I am hard-pressed. Everybody likes humor, don't they? Until it can return in a form man can recognize in you. What does that sound like to anybody? Forget the Messiah complex, because we already established life didn't go anywhere. Forget the idea, well, someday life will return and go, oh, come here, you little rascal, and give you a noogie on your head and go, you know, I wasn't all that mad, it'll be all right. Yeah. So what could it possibly signify? What is this? It doesn't sound like anything to... Life let man invent all this stuff. Would it help if I include mysticism? Because it includes everything. I left out no exception. I assumed you understood that everything this side of physical survival, sex, eating, sleeping, all that everything from the level of consciousness up is what we're discussing. Life let man invent all of this. All. A-L-L. All. Life let man invent all of that, so he would have, up here, a little something to occupy him till it returned in a form he could recognize in you. So all of this, according to this story, it was just something that life let man do to occupy him until life returned in a form that man could recognize anew. So we established life didn't actually go anywhere. But man thinks it did. And that says that he just let him think that, because him thinking life went away is included in all of civilization, all of his thoughts, that's part of it. But according to my story, that life let man do that, so he'd have something to occupy him until life returned, which it didn't go anywhere, until it returned in a form man could recognize in you. If you followed all of this, if you did, it actually makes sense here at the end if you consider what that sounds like. Does the word, it's not original, but does the word enlightenment, higher level of consciousness, expanded consciousness, does any of that sound familiar? At the collective level of saying that life let men do this, then you're talking about don't hold your breath. That is, you're talking about what it is the continuing, as far as you should be concerned, infinite evolvement of humanity even here. That is, an individual cannot sit around and wait, which is the same thing as being religious. Many would-be mystics and people who believe they're involved with some kind of great struggle to liberate their mind and consciousness, without any doubt, historically, have always, or very often looked down on religion or believed it was a childish version and that they have risen above it. Oh, really? They're still waiting for Godot. I couldn't resist. Somebody did that one accidentally instead of doing a purposeful fox path. They've just changed the name of it. As they believe that an extended state of consciousness, they operate on the basis of if I join up some organization or if I pursue something that has been used in the past, they wouldn't call it this, but they are operating on the basis that humanity itself or some group will eventually become more conscious and I'll be part of it. No. You'll die first. Not just you, everybody will die before humanity, the full parade, makes a step further that would be of any significance to the individuals therein. If you didn't know it, that's one of the rules. Well, that's right, you didn't know it. Nobody knew that. That's one of the laws, that's one of the undiscovered rules and laws of physics, if you don't know the truth. And evolution, biology, everything from here up, if you didn't know, is that life in toto, the collective consciousness of humanity, the collective mental conscious state of humanity will never progress in one lifetime enough to where the movement is of any significance to any individual therein. That if you see what I was talking about, it's the same belief. Even the people who would claim to be atheists or agnostics or on a higher level, they're in the same position as believing, well, Jesus will come back. Buddha's just waiting for the right moment. Right. He may be, but it ain't going to be this moment. Which one would you talking about? Any one that you're aware of? Well, he might. You won't be here. You won't be here. It's a simple fact. Individually, you will not be here. By the time the thing moves, by the time the parade, from our view now, if you could get above it, if we're going to speak in spatial terms, if you could flap above it to where you could see what appeared to be temporal movement in spatial terms, if you went there that high and you could step there long enough and the parade of humanity moved enough that everyone, all the sane parts, all the same genetic sound parts of everyone was now more conscious than they were when you went up and looked down on them. You got me? That everybody is now a bit more conscious, demonstrably more conscious. You can't live in that. If you go, well, now we're getting somewhere, I'll drop back in there and join them now, and at no expense to myself, I will have become more conscious. You will drop in just in time for them to bury you. In fact, you'll be right by then. They'll be thinking, where's it? They'll suddenly recognize where that terrible smell's been coming from, that you've been dead and they just couldn't find your body until you return. It's only the individual that can do something like this and finally let it go, and life return to him. Life didn't go anywhere, but life returns now in a form you recognize anew. You can't recognize an old. That's the old idea of God. That's the old idea of when we die in the future and go to heaven, we'll go backwards. I'll be back where life and I, or God and I, were originally. No, you won't. You'll be dead. The only way that you can become more conscious is what you see afresh. Life didn't go anywhere, but suddenly it's like it returned, and you went, Jesus, is that a new suit? Have you had your hair done? Or better put, I didn't appreciate you when you were here originally. Not like the other one. You finally get to see life again, you went, you've had your hair done since I saw you before.